Hello everyone, welcome back to ZTalks. Today I am back again to give you guys another review of not a book, but a TV show. Well, a TV show slash documentary slash docuseries called Who Killed Malcolm X? Now, for those of you who know a bit about the Malcolm X assassination, you would have picked up on the fact that this episode is published on the 21st of February 2025, which happens to be the anniversary of his assassination, which is the 21st of February 1965. Now, just so you know, I did not plan that. It just so happened that this episode fell on the podcast posting schedule and it just lined up perfectly. So you can say that it was meant to be for me to do this episode on this day. But I digress. This documentary, I must say, jam-packed. If you never knew about Malcolm X before this episode, you're going to find out a whole lot about him, his life, his work, and ultimately, as the episode states, his death. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before we continue on, I think it would be worthwhile knowing who is Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm X actually started off as Malcolm Little. He was born in 1925 America. Now, as we talked about on previous episodes of the podcast, this was a time of the deep racism. So he grew up having a very aware, not let me say aware, but he grew up with racism in his face and with a sort of animosity towards white people because his family was actually terrorized and victimized by the Ku Klux Klan. He had his house burned down when he was a child. And he always thought that his father was actually murdered by the Ku Klux Klan also because his dad died in an emergency room after being found next to a trolley. And it was speculated, the police were like, he just got ran over by the trolley. But his family was like, no, the Ku Klux Klan was out to get him. So this is the context in which Malcolm X grew up, a highly polarized, racist childhood. And you can imagine how having that outlook on life and white people and having that constant attack against him and his family could have shaped his views later on in life. But I digress. After all of this happened, he went on to go on a very dark and dangerous path. He got into a life of crime. He was selling drugs, burglarizing, stealing, and he did this until he ended up in prison in 1946 for burglary. Now, most people, go in prison and they're just chilling and grilling, but not Malcolm. He went into prison and he found God. More than just God, but he found religion. And not just any religion, but a following of an organization called the Nation of Islam. And he was converted to this, I'd say, religious group during his time in prison. And when he came out of prison, he actually was so moved by his conversion to the Nation of Islam that he actually went to Chicago to meet their leader, Elijah Muhammad. Now, just a little background on the Nation of Islam. They are more than just a religious group. They're actually a black nationalist organization where they promote black leadership, black people having rights in America. So it was all of that wrapped up into religion, just one big super organization. And Upon meeting Elijah Muhammad, he began to be a core leader, a core person inside of the Nation of Islam, so much so that he became very popular. He became one of their lead speakers and Elijah Muhammad's right-hand man. They were best buds, confidants. He was the go-to guy. If Elijah Muhammad needed something done, he was like, "Where's my boy Malcolm?" So that was them, up close and personal, real tight. And he became so ingratiated in the group that he actually followed the tradition of dropping his last name Little to X. So that's how he became Malcolm X. Because the tradition was once you joined the Nation of Islam, you dropped your last name because they believed that the last name was actually descended from slave owners who ruled over, their family of slaves, because Black people, a lot of them came from a background of slavery. So that's why he dropped his last name and became Malcolm X. And during his time in the Nation of Islam, he actually formed his political view, his political outlook on life, and actually started shaping the Black political landscape in America. And he advocated for and believed in Black people not really integrating with white people. He was a proponent, more of a discourager of Black and white integration, and he actually opposed civil rights leaders that promoted nonviolent methods in reaction or in proposing or promoting Black views. So that's why you might hear people saying Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, they weren't on the same side of the coin. Because Martin Luther King was like, peace, love, and happiness. Let's fight for our rights. But in a peaceful way. Malcolm X was like, no. If there's violence, we're going to do it. And we're going to get our rights because the ends justifies the means. So you can clearly see the type of person that Malcolm X was. Black civil rights at all and any cost. And that's where we start our dive into the documentary. Someone on the political stage promoting Black civil rights at all costs, and some people around him being like, maybe we gotta take this guy down. Maybe we gotta kill him. So instead of starting from the beginning, let's start from the end. Because we all know that Malcolm X was assassinated, obviously, because that is the title of this episode and the title of the documentary. But the real question is, who killed him? And in order to know that, we really have to run through the facts. So let's run through a couple of things. So Malcolm X was shot and killed in New York in the Audubon Ballroom while he was preparing to deliver a speech to his organization called the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And he was just about to, start giving this grand speech when he was shot 21 times. And the killer shot came from a shotgun. The shotgun was shot by one of 3 or 5 people who were shooting guns at him. We'll come back to the supposed exact number later, but that is how it went down. Now, one of the 3 or 5 people that killed him ran out of the ballroom and got caught. The other people ran out, and to this day, not to this day, that's why we have this documentary, but nobody found them. They just vanished in thin air. But the guy was arrested right outside of the ballroom when he was running out and trying to escape. And his name is Talmadge Hayer. And he went to prison. He served life. And a couple days later, 2 other people were arrested for committing the crime along with Talmadge Hayer. One of them was named Norman 3X Butler, but he later changed his name to Muhammad Abdul Aziz. And the other was Thomas 15X Johnson, who was later known as Khalil Islam. Now, both of these two people were arrested along with Talmadge Hayer a couple days later, and they also went to prison for life. So 3 people arrested for the crime, case closed, done, shut, everyone forgot about them in prison. But that turns out not to be the case. Because what makes this whole documentary a thing is the fact that the 2 additional people that were arrested maintained their innocence the entire time. Since the time they were arrested, they claimed that they had nothing to do with the assassination. And the whole time that they were in prison, they also maintained their innocence of having nothing to do with the assassination. Now, Talmadge Hayer, he was caught red-handed, so everybody know he did it. But at first, he didn't confirm or deny these other 2 people who were sent to prison also. But what makes this documentary a thing is that later on, while he was in prison, he signed a sworn affidavit saying that Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson had nothing to do with the assassination with him. It was actually 4 other people that were in the ballroom with him that also fired shots at Malcolm X. And he named the people in the sworn affidavit. But nothing happened. These people remained in prison and served out their full sentences. So that's what makes us come to the documentary. Because all of that is a bit fishy, and if we knew possibly who did it, and these people were still in prison, then did they actually do it? Was the affidavit a lie? Who actually done it? So that's what we're going to try to find out. Now, we aren't the only ones trying to get to the bottom of who exactly killed or was behind the crime of killing Malcolm X. And furthermore, trying to find out the reasons why he was killed. The main person, besides us who's trying to find this out, is the center of the whole docuseries, besides Malcolm X, of course. His name is Abdur-Rahman Muhammad. He is an independent researcher and historian who literally just wants to get to the bottom of it. He is enamored by Malcolm X as a political force, and he is also a Muslim. And through his studies, he became fascinated and intrigued and basically sucked into the conspiracy theories around Malcolm X's assassination. And he thought that, I'm the one that's going to get to the bottom of it. And through his years of research, he actually comes to hold the position of supporting Talmadge Hayer's sworn affidavit and maintaining the innocence of the 2 additional men that were arrested and charged with the crime of killing Malcolm X. So the whole documentary is him interviewing and actually finding people that were alive at the time, because just a point about the style of this documentary, Malcolm X was killed in 1965, which is not a long time ago. So he was actually able to find a lot of the people that were literally around him in his inner circle and actually in the Nation of Islam at the time that he was assassinated. Police officers who were actually investigating the crime, he actually got them on screen to interview them and investigate it and trying to find out what happened. So the whole documentary is going through this style of investigative journalism, and him through these interviews proposing alternate theories of who was behind and who actually killed Malcolm X. And 2 of the main prominent alternate theories are the Nation of Islam and the FBI. But let's start with the Nation of Islam. Now, some of you might be wondering, why is the Nation of Islam a suspect in Malcolm X's death? When I just told you that the leader of the Nation of Islam had Malcolm X as his right-hand man, and Malcolm X was the big guy in the nation. But that is where we come to the juiciest part of the documentary for me, actually, which was the beef, the falling out that Malcolm X had with the nation. Now, Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, two people that coexisted together really well, best bros, but they saw different visions for the nation. Elijah Muhammad, as the religious leader of the nation, wanted to keep the nation religious and, in their own realm, keeping it peaceful, keeping it not peaceful, but just, not doing too much. Malcolm X, on the other hand, as I previously stated, he's the guy where the ends justifies the means when it comes to having black people enfranchised. So for him, he was all for the politics. And Elijah Muhammad, he was not for the politics because this is the 1960s. And if you remember anything about this time period from the RFK episode, you would know that this is a decade of intense polarization between black and white people. And having an organization such as the Nation of Islam is bad enough when it comes to anything in sort of police, the government looking down your backs because obviously they're going to think you're up to something. But being in politics, that's just putting your neck out of the window and you're doing a lot. And Malcolm, he didn't care. So in comes the reason why they fell out, which is the assassination of JFK. Now, JFK, if you remember a little bit about the other episode, he was actually a proponent of civil rights. And for Elijah Muhammad, this was enough to brand him as one of the good white people. So he did not want to upset anybody and say anything bad about JFK when he was assassinated. Now, Malcolm X, as I said, he discouraged any black and white integration. So for him, he couldn't even see JFK for any of the good characteristics he had in relation to black people. So when he was assassinated, he made some very disparaging comments about JFK, which I will not repeat here. You can search it up online if you want, but just know that it wasn't nice. And Elijah Muhammad, he did not like that because he told Malcolm X, don't you go out there saying anything disparaging about JFK because that's going to come back on the Nation of Islam. That's going to bite us in the butt. And Malcolm X, he was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'll keep it cool, keep it cordial. But he went up on one of his speeches and said stuff anyway. And for that, Malcolm X was excommunicated. Well, not excommunicated, he was suspended from making any public speeches or appearances from Elijah Muhammad. And you would think Malcolm X would have, a little shred of remorse from, being suspended and might, try to apologize. He did in the beginning, but after he saw that was getting him nowhere, he got angry. And this is where the falling out became into an all-out beef because he was like, you know what? Forget y'all. Forget the nation and forget Elijah. I'm going to actually come out here and say some stuff. And boy, did he say some stuff. He accused Elijah Muhammad's children and Elijah Muhammad of exploiting the Nation of Islam for money and getting rich off the back of its followers. And even more than that, he accused Elijah Muhammad of having children with children. Actually having kids from his teenage followers. And for that, slandering his name in the public press. This wasn't something he said on the street. This is something that he went to the press and said about Elijah Muhammad. For slandering Elijah Muhammad's name, that's when he got excommunicated. And that whole thing about slandering Elijah Muhammad's names on the street wasn't taken lightly by the Nation of Islam's followers, because one thing you need to understand about the Nation of Islam, it was almost cult-like. They revered Elijah Muhammad. So Malcolm X going on the streets saying this stuff about their leader, they were like, he gotta go. And one of the main people who was like, he gotta go, was the mosque leader in the Newark Mosque, and James 3X Shabazz was the leader of the Newark Mosque, and he and Elijah Muhammad, best buds. He was like, that's my bro. And now that Malcolm X was saying stuff about his bro, he started telling his followers, listen, Malcolm X, a pig, a fraud, he's slandering our leader. He got to go. He was telling the followers in his mosque that Malcolm X got to go. And what makes the Nation of Islam a theory behind the murder of Malcolm X is that in the sworn affidavit from Talmadge Hayer, he actually claims that the other shooters came from the mosque in Newark. Now, that you got to connect the dots, guys. You have the leader of the mosque in Newark telling his followers Malcolm X got to go. And then a guy who actually was caught red-handed committing the crime saying that, hey, all the other guys who committed the crime with me were from that mosque where their leader was telling them, Malcolm X got to go. So I don't know about you, but that theory sounds very strong and plausible to me. Now, the other theory is the FBI and the NYPD. And also, I don't know if I would really call it a theory. It's more like established fact, because the whole premise of this branch of the documentary is that the FBI and the NYPD knew what was going on and they just turned a blind eye and did nothing. And furthermore, they actually encouraged and supported the assassination of Malcolm X, which honestly I 100% agree with, because the facts are there. So let's look at the facts. So from the time Malcolm X starts affiliating himself with the Nation of Islam and starts becoming a prominent speaker, the FBI is tracking him. They are on him like peanut butter on jelly. People are bugging his phones, his house, following him, having people around him to inform them of what he's doing. They are monitoring every single aspect of Malcolm X. They have detailed folders of files, of boxes, of the daily movements that Malcolm X took since he joined the Nation of Islam. And one of the main reasons that they have such detailed monitoring of Malcolm X is because they're scared. This is the time that the FBI is under the administration of J. Edgar Hoover. And if you know anything about Mr. Hoover, you might know, as the documentary highlights, is that he is afraid of the Black Messiah, air quotes. He is afraid of a Black political movement that would be led by a leader that would lead Black people to be enfranchised and basically run insurgencies in America. And he is afraid that Malcolm X would be the leader to politicize the Nation of Islam and unite them towards the cause of insurgency. And he kind of has reasons to justify this fear, because as I said, Malcolm X is all for the politics. So the FBI, if you know anything about Martin Luther King's assassination, they actually have dedicated units to breaking up and causing divisions and just trying to break down Black political movements at that time. So they spare no expense to try and infiltrate successfully and break up the Nation of Islam. And one of their main targets or missions was to try and cause a wedge between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. And they kind of got this handed to them when there was a falling out between Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. They were like, oh, that was kind of easy. We didn't have to do that much because they fell out anyway. But just because they fell out doesn't mean Malcolm X still didn't do the work. He, as I said before, started his own organization. And through this organization, he was still lobbying for black rights, black nationalism, black activism. He was still doing the work. And the FBI was like, wow, even though he's left the nation, he is still a threat. And in the last year of his life, Malcolm X became even more of a threat to the FBI because he started going international. He wasn't just doing speeches or rallies or meeting people in the United States anymore. He was actually traveling around to parts of Africa, all over the world, to meet black leaders to try and start a coalition, and he was a big proponent and participant in the non-aligned movement. He was a supporter of starting a coalition of black leaders to try and enfranchise black people worldwide. And he wanted to use this movement to also help black Americans. And through participating in this worldwide movement, he actually brought bad press to America on the international stage because he was pointing out the hypocrisies of the United States, pointing out how they brand themselves as the nation of the free, but they're actually committing police brutality and disenfranchising a large segment of their population, which is black people. Now, because of this, the FBI started upping surveillance on Malcolm X and actually worked with the NYPD to create a whole special services called the Bureau of Special Services in order to monitor Malcolm X. And this, at least for me, was intense because not only do you have the FBI monitoring you, you have the NYPD monitoring you as well. And this was kind of a one-way relationship. It wasn't like a back and forth between the FBI and the NYPD. It was basically the FBI using the NYPD as an avenue to put more surveillance on Malcolm X. And for me, the fact that this happened kind of supports the whole theory that the FBI was not in on it, but allowed it to happen, because an additional fact, on the day that Malcolm X was assassinated, the FBI had 9 informants in the Audubon ballroom at the time that he was killed. So you can see that they blatantly allowed it to happen, because you can't tell me that 5 guys entered the Audubon ballroom with guns, one of them with a sawed-off shotgun, and none of y'all picked that up. And what is even more evidence, Malcolm X's bodyguard, the guy that actually performed mouth-to-mouth on Malcolm X as he was bleeding out on the floor, was an informant from the Bureau of Special Services. So you guys can see why the FBI and the NYPD were called out as co-conspirators or enablers in the assassination of Malcolm X in the documentary. And believe it or not, this isn't even all of the justification. There are so many more, not theories, but so much more evidence as to why they were involved. And I can't even go into all of it, or else we would be here for another 30 minutes. But what I am going to do is tell you guys to watch the documentary, because in addition to the unique style of the interviews of the people who were there at the time, first and foremost, this documentary is heavy on the facts. There is so much research and evidence, and just, I don't know how long they took on to do this, but you can tell there was so much thought and organization that went into this series that I was blown away. I haven't even scratched the surface of what they went into, and I will highly recommend you to watch this. So here we come to my rating, and based off of the high praise I just gave it, I am going to give it a 4 out of 5 stars. And you might be wondering, why not 5 out of 5 stars? I'm not honestly sure. Usually I have justification for not giving something 5 stars, but in this instance, I honestly don't know. I just have to say 4 out of 5. It was a good documentary, but for some reason, I just wasn't all the way there, even though it was good. I just can't give it a 5 because I've experienced a 5 and this is a 4. Can't tell you why, but it's still a 4. But I still recommend you to watch it. It is really well done, and I honestly, there's no other outside research that you might need to do in relation to Malcolm X and his assassination besides watching this documentary. It is comprehensive and thorough. So, yeah, that is all I have to say today about Who Killed Malcolm X. As I said, I highly recommend you to watch the documentary, get the full knowledge and scope of Malcolm X and what happened, because as I said, I didn't even scratch the surface. And it's right on Netflix, so just after watching this, go on over and click on the documentary. And if not, you should actually go on over to our other platforms, either YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and listen or watch more episodes of ZTalks. And even if you don't want to do that, I'll just trust that you come back next time and tune in for another episode of ZTalks.